the speaking test. There are 3 parts in the speaking test, and in total, the speaking test lasts for 11 to around 14 minutes. Part 1 is the introduction and interview, lasting for 4 to 5 minutes. Before you begin, the examiner will ask you to show your ID card or your passport to identify yourself. And then, the examiner will ask you about 3 topics. And you have to answer around 2 questions in each topic. That means, in part 1, you must be prepared to answer around 6 to 10 or maybe more questions if your answers are too short. The questions in part 1 are called short questions because they require short answers. But how short your answers should be, we'll talk about that later. And also remember that in part 1, the topics asked are really familiar. They're usually about you, your friends, your family, your education or job, and something like that. Part 2 is your monologue. I mean, you will be given a cue card which looks like this. On the cue card, you can find a topic. For example, describe a teacher and 3 to 4 guiding questions. Something like where you met them, what subjects they taught, and so on. You should follow these guiding questions because they show you the way to answer the topic, to talk about the topic. Now let's get back to what you have to do in part 2. First, the examiner will give you a cue card, and then you are given 1 minute to make an outline. It's optional. You can choose to make it or not, but it's always highly recommended to make an outline because you may forget some or all of the necessary things that you may want to talk about once you have started speaking. And the examiner will not interview when you're speaking. You have to talk about this topic from 1 to 2 minutes, and at the end of your talk or when the time is over, the examiner will ask you 1 or 2 short questions that are called follow-up questions. Remember to give a very short answer to these 2 questions. Finally, you will go to part 3, which is called a two-way discussion. And once again, just like part 1, part 3 lasts for 4 to 5 minutes. And the way part 3 is conducted is quite similar to the way part 1 is done. I mean, the examiner will ask you questions and you will answer. You are not allowed to see the questions, just like in part 1. You cannot see the questions. You have to hear, listen to the questions, and answer them. There's a difference between part 1 and part 3. The questions in part 3 are called long questions because they require longer and more complicated answers. And the topic asked about in part 3 is closely related to the topic given to you in part 2. For example, in part 2, you are asked to talk about a teacher. In part 3, the possible topic will be education or something like that. It's no longer about you. It's about the society around you, for example. So some general knowledge will help in part 3.